All right. Welcome here to the KHTS studio. We are live here at 98.1 FM. The show is Problem Solver Politics, and we've got some really cool guests in the studios. I am joined by my co-host, Mark Murphy.
Hey, as we try to restore civility to the political conversation, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, and our special guest of honor in the hot seat, the awesome seat, the wise seat. We've got the, what do they call city councilman? The honorable?
They do.
Is it the honorable? Okay, we've got the honorable Cameron Smythe with us.
I don't know if they refer to this city council member as the honorable. But. So here's my question. Am I your first repeat guest?
Oh, goodness gracious. No. Andrew Tabon's been on twice.
Bill Miranda.
Bill Miranda's been on twice. And it depends on also the connotation that you put to repeat guest. If it's a negative connotation, no way. We view you as wise.
I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering where I fall in the pecking order.
Dude. Top dog. In fact,
I think it's important to know that both Democrats and Republicans will vote for him because we think he represents them, which just shows you kind of the split personality that we in Santa Clarita have.
And I do have to say, before I do pepper you with my questions, because I really, really am looking forward to your insight in a lot of these things and the happenings as of late in the political sphere here in Santa Clarita in the 25th District and so on and so forth. Knowing you is a very hilarious experience. Because if I mention this week, I'm going to talk to 20 people, and they're all going to say, "Oh, saw your show. Yeah, what about this? What about that?" And they're going to ask me because in certain circles they view me as the loudmouth, politically engaged person, right? And they'll ask me X, Y, or Z things, and they will opine and interject. And the spectrum of interjections I get about Cameron Smythe are so across the board that I think literally next to maybe Senator McCain before he passed. Okay, that's the only time I've ever experienced such a wide spectrum, because I have literally been sitting in meetings with my most progressive, want to socialize everything friends and call each other comrade, you know what I'm saying, who have literally seen, like in the SB 54 meeting, I was overhearing conversations where people were like, "Oh, dude, man, Cameron's our only hope, man. He's got aspirations. He's smart. He knows what's up." Like convinced that you had one of their red hats on, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, I got people saying, "Oh, he's the only real patriot up there." So you've got people convinced you're libertarian, dog, and you got other people convinced that you're their only hope. So it's actually really funny.
Most importantly, though, is what does my father-in-law think? Since you know Jim, that's the most important, perspective.
Oh, that's pretty funny. But I do have to tell you, last show we had Mark Winger and Andrew Tabon on, and I made the statement, and I made it very clear that, hey, the reason why I want these guys on and I want their insight is because they don't break the rules. My personal rules of political engagement is always humanity over politics, and the second is no sellouts. You know what I'm saying? You can't. No hypocrisy is another way of saying no sellouts, right? Because I think those are the two things that bother us most, right?
And this is a political show?
Yeah, it's a political show. I know, it's kind of crazy.
Okay.
So something I liked about Cameron, and the reason why I consistently call him and ask him to come back, is one time I was actually with Andrew Tabon after the SB 54 meeting, and our cars were together, and we walked out, and it was really funny. Andrew told him, "Hey, thanks for serving and being here until 2 or 3 in the morning. Obviously, it wasn't what I wanted." You know what I'm saying? And he was like, "Oh, that's cool. And we all had a fun, good, solid conversation after it was all over, which I very much appreciate. And plus, he's just so dang knowledgeable. He knows the whole system, because I think you're really our only city councilman that's been on the state level as well, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. So anyway, let's just dive right in here.
Sure.
We usually do funny local news, but you're here, and we're just going to talk about cool stuff instead.
Okay.
I do mention that he didn't run during this last runoff that had, 17 or 15 candidates,
right,
and the 3 incumbents were reelected, and he wasn't part of that mess. He got to stand back and observe it.
He was above the fray, I know.
That's very cool.
So, okay, my mind is blown by this last election. Dear city councilman who served in the state assembly, okay, wasn't a red. We have this joke. Wasn't a red wave nationally. It wasn't a wave. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. A bunch went this way and a bunch went that way. Usually we're used to kind of seeing this general shift one way and a general shift somewhere, kind of like a tide or, yes, like a wave. But now it just split viciously down the middle. And then some other just sacred cows were completely dispensed with.
We call it a blue tsunami, but we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, California, I think you could say.
No, without a doubt.
Yeah, California.
Yeah. Jeez, we're here.
Yeah, California got spanked in a very unique way. It's almost like nowhere else did it happen like it happened here. Mm-hmm. So I was talking with Mark and I was talking with Andrew, and they were speculating as to why they were so wildly successful. And I think you can't say wildly successful. Not unhinged successful, but wildly successful.
Beyond anybody's expectations.
Yeah,
really.
Yes, beyond our expectations. I would like to know what your opinion of what just happened to us, because I've got some certain things I'm afraid of that I would like to address and analyze. I tried to address something with them. Half of it got somewhere. But I'd like to see your perspective and what you think was the cause, what you think was the success, what you think how we're going to address this in the future as a district, so on and so forth.
So are you talking statewide at first?
Top
do
to
you
bottom.
Do that? Sure. So
top to bottom.
So this is not, for people that are watching, this was not really a big surprise in California. I think the surprise was that it happened in 2018.
Yeah, so fast.
I've been saying, you localize it. I have felt for a number of years that Steve Knight, Dante, Scott Wilk were going to be the last Republicans to represent this area. I just didn't think it was going to happen in 2018. I felt that once the redistricting happened in 2020, and then you had the new seats in 22, the math just doesn't work out for Republican legislators in this area anymore. I mean, just in LA County, Republicans are at 17% voter registration.
Yeah.
Wow.
The largest county in the country, 17%. Where the Republicans are the third party now, behind independents.
Yeah, it's absolutely embarrassing. You stole my fact. Thanks.
Sorry.
That was the one I had memorized.
and so the math, like I said, the math just doesn't ultimately work out, here for Santa Clarita to continue, having Republican representatives in the legislative side. Santa Clarita still remains, if not slightly more Republican, close to 50-50.
Okay, now can I interject one thing? I've heard what you're saying, and there was part of me that thought, okay, we're going the way of Michigan. We're going the way of, all these states now.
But we're not going Michigan. I mean, Michigan has, they still have a majority in both the House and Senate.
Oh, I guess I should say Detroit.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
I don't think we're going that way. I think that's a little.
You're right, that might be a little bit extreme, but I only mentioned that in my last show because, like Baltimore City and Detroit, for example, are cities that have not had a Republican mayor since the 60s,
right.
Literally. And I think you see a lot of that demonstrated in the urban decay and so on and so forth. And it was more an argument against single party rule. But there's some wild stats. Democrats have controlled the state assembly since 1971.
No.
Yeah, it's been since 1971. They've had a majority.
1994, Republicans.
Well, it's 1993. Well, according to Wikipedia.
It was the 94. And I know this because it was my first time working. I worked for
That's the higher house, though. I thought
the assembly is the assembly is the lower house.
Yeah, so I thought they've controlled since the 70s.
The Senate.
A majority in
the Senate.
The state Senate. Okay, cool.
Correct.
And then in the mid 90s, that's when
Correct.
the majority in. So either way, it's been 20 plus years.
Oh, by far. And
yeah.
It's funny because I had a very twisted perspective because truly my first job was working as a field rep for the California Republican Party in 1994. So, you had this, this red wave where every statewide office except for lieutenant governor went Republican.
Wow.
And Republicans took the majority in the assembly. And so in my mind, that was the perspective. But now you look at that 24 years later, basically one generation removed from that, you don't have any Republican statewide office holder. The state assembly is now 60-20.
Yeah.
And the state senate is going to be 29-11.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was the surprise when you saw, the complete dismantling of any Republican legislator. And I think Scott Wilk was very fortunate that he wasn't on the ballot, because I think he would have lost his seat, if he was on the ballot this time. And I don't think you can, in California, you can't minimize the impact of the president. And, and the disdain.
It was a hate vote.
That, and when you look at it, because some of these, members of Congress in particular that lost to people that really don't represent their district. So I look at Mimi Walters in the 45th district, Orange County, Huntington, Laguna, that type of area. 2 years ago, Mimi won by, I think, like 14 points. And she's getting, she lost to someone who has been a pretty vocal Elizabeth Warren supporter.
Yeah.
And I don't think Kate Porter really represents that district, but because of the vote, the vote to get the anti-Trump vote, and you can't minimize the amount of money that was spent either.
Look at Katie Hill. As a Democrat, and as a moderate Democrat, I don't see that she represents the Democratic Party at all in this area. I recognize she represents a part of our party. Maybe it's the very far left side, but for those of us in the middle, she's so far removed from us, it's almost scary.
So to give you an idea, I was talking to Steve Knight's media buyer, doing his TV buys and all. He said the last week of the election, the Hill campaign spent $3 million alone on TV ads, in the last week. And when you have over $20 million, being spent on your behalf, you're just not going to. It's hard for any incumbent, particularly under this, temperature, if you will, this kind of anti-Republican in California. It's really tough to hold on. And I think as a result, Dante Acosta became kind of a casualty of that. Yeah. A guy named Matthew Harper was the assembly member from Huntington Beach. Same thing. You ultimately just can't compete. And people were voting Democrat, down the line. And the perfect example of this is a State Board of Equalization seat in San Diego County, which has been strong Republican for decades. State Senator Joel Anderson, with whom I came into the assembly with, is going to lose that seat to a perennial 80-year-old pre-felon candidate, but for the simple fact that it was Republican versus Democrat, and people were just going to vote in an kind of an anti-Trump way in a lot of these areas. And so the question will be, what happens in 2020? With some of these areas, do they kind of snap back? What happens with a Kate Porter or some of the these folks that or I forget his name, who won in the 10th district, who beat Jeff Denham, who doesn't even really live in the district, lives in the Bay Area.
He pulled a Brian Caforio, Tony Strickland.
And so the question is, what happens in 2 years, when the districts remain the same, and now you have the president on the ballot?
Okay, yes. I definitely think having the president on the ballot is going to influence and motivate a lot more Republicans to come out than maybe were kind of sat this one out and are a little bit disinterested. I know that they tried to get this gas tax going on to get people out, but this is the only pushback.
Do you really think they didn't come out? Because every Republican I talked to was making a point of
well, this is my question for Cameron, because and it has to do with your analysis of, really, were there that many people that sat at home? Because there were so many. I mean, Democrats claim to have registered more than 1 million. I was able to confirm 890,000 new registrants altogether in the election. So somewhere between there, which was probably around 1 million, they got a million new people registered to vote. Now, you said, okay, I always thought that Steve Knight would be the last Republican, Steve Wilk would be the last Republican because of X, Y, or Z thing. And they kind of... A lot of people have your school of thought, and they always measure these demographics. And I can see why you would think that if nobody does anything in the Republican Party. And that's kind of been my biggest beef, is I'm looking at this, and the poor brothers over at COC that are in the College Republicans Club, there's like 7 of them.
Right.
And you can't tell me In a town like Santa Clarita, there's only 7 motivated youth. That's obviously a dereliction of duty on somebody's part. Yeah. I've never received massive mailers. I am probably one of only 2, if you count Dave Goss, who's moving, 3, not even conservative, but just like politically engaged radio hosts that often engage on behalf of the local Republicans, and I've never been reached out to at all. I look at this and I think, if nobody does anything, we're going to pull an Edmund Burke. He literally said the only thing that evil needs to succeed is that good men do nothing, right? And I see a ton of Republican Party do-nothingness here, enough where I think, is our problem really demographic change? No, because there's tons of Latinos. When you talk to them about taxes and you talk to them about payroll taxes, and they start getting into how these ladder safety regulations and X, Y, and Z things are getting passed, and they're just pummeling these guys that own these businesses, they get real Republican real quick when you get into the nitty-gritty.
And the question is, for those guys, do they really vote in a midterm? And the answer is probably no. But do they recognize that the president keeps them with his regulations, and that's what you see. But you can look at the numbers, just the comparison from 2016 to 2018. I looked at them last week, so they're changing a little bit, but it's pretty close. I mean, Steve Knight received close to 40,000 fewer votes in 2018 than he received in 2016. Katie Hill only received about 10,000 more votes than Caforio did in 16.
Well, yeah,
it's an interesting, so it's, for a nerd like me, how do you, is that turnout?
Yeah.
Or is that vote switching? What is what accounts for that? Because if Steve had received the same amount of votes that he did in 2016, he would have won handily.
Well, and I can speak in terms of some of my Democratic children and their friends. Bottom line, they voted for Knight last time, but they did not. They voted Katie Hill this time. Now, for those of us in the moderates in the middle, even though we may have voted for Knight, we were so overwhelmed by this group that said we are anti-Trump. The president definitely brought them out to vote against him.
Okay,
and that was a shame.
Right. So I want to nerd out with you, like you say, because I'm totally into the numbers as well. If there was a betting place in Vegas with these numbers, I would be in like Flynn, okay? But I take a slightly different interpretation of these numbers, and I want to bounce a couple of these ideas off you. First, we're going to hit a commercial break really quick, but when we come back, I really want to talk about what these numbers mean in terms of enthusiasm, in terms of triaging what just happened, the whole 9 yards. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in 60 seconds. This is Problem Solver Politics.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire.
This Christmas, join us for the ultimate holiday concert, A Very Merry Christmas with the Letterman, Sunday, December 9th, 5 p.m. at the Santa Clarita Performing Arts Center. The legendary Letterman here in Santa Clarita singing your favorite holiday classics. Joining them is Santa Clarita's singing sensation, Savannah Burrows, along with our very own West Ranch High School choir. You'll also hear the Letterman perform their string of top 10 hits. A Very Merry Christmas with the Letterman.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
The Letterman, Savannah Burrows, and West Ranch Choir, Sunday, December 9th. For tickets, visit canyonspack.com.
Merry Christmas.
Every year, thousands of local children, teens, and adults receive treatment at the Child and Family Center for depression, anger, anxiety, abuse, thoughts of suicide, and drug and alcohol addictions. Our professional staff provides outpatient services at office locations, in the home, the community, and on many elementary, junior, and high school campuses throughout our valley. If you need help, contact Child and Family Center at 259-9439 or childfamilycenter.org. Improving lives, one family at a time.
We'd like to thank our advertisers and readers for their loyal support since 1991.
Linda and Mo Hafizi, owners of our Valley's 2 leading magazines, Elite and the Magazine of Santa Clarita.
The only magazine in our valley mailed to 80,000 homes and businesses every month, with over 250 pages of community news and features.
Discover how the Magazine of Santa Clarita can help your business. Call 294 4444.
Superior quality is second nature to us. Just ask our advertisers.
KHTS. Now FM 98.1 FM and AM 1220. Your hometown station.
All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. We are live in the KHTS studio with my co-host, Mark Murphy.
Hey, just making sure we restore civility to this political discussion. We survived Thanksgiving. Just keep that in mind.
We also got in the studio with us Cameron Smythe, the honorable councilman, who also served 3 terms, I believe it was, as a state assemblyman, right? You termed out, correct?
Correct. That's
Okay.
important. That's an important distinction that I was not voted out. I was not
voted out.
indicted. I was.
He was...
The people loved me. That's what I go with.
And he gets strong support from both sides of the parties. It is amazing to see what they think of him.
And I appreciate that. And that's something that when I went to the legislature, I knew that I was going to be part of the minority party. So I had a decision to make: is what kind of legislator was I going to be? If I'm going to leave my wife, my little kids 100+ nights a year, I'm not just going to go up there and be an ideological bomb thrower and put a heavy book on the red button and just walk away and vote no every time. I made the conscious decision that I was going to do what was I thought right for the district, B, what was right for the state, and it didn't matter to me where the idea came from. And I had to be willing to, when I had a good idea, know that usually one of my Democrat friends was going to take it and give me the honor of being the co-author of the bill. And
so you got a lot through that benefited this district.
And I was the only Republican to chair a major policy committee when I was in the legislature. Speaker John Perez named me the chair of the Assembly Local Government Committee, and I was the only Republican doing that. And there were a number of Democrats that weren't chairing committees, and he still had me serve. And that was, to me, that was a real validation of everything that I went to do in Sacramento, and to be given that ability and that title by the Democrat speaker really meant a lot. And again, it helped me do the best I could. And I will always say the last vote I ever cast in the legislature came about after the first vote went through on an issue, and there weren't enough Democrat votes. They needed 2 Republican votes, and there weren't enough Democrat votes, and in walks the governor's chief of staff, and she's like, "What's going on?" And I said, "Look at the board. You don't have enough votes. Let's wait till you have all your Democrat votes up." And she's like, her name's Nancy McFadden. She just passed away and was an amazing lady. And so then I'm kind of hanging out on the floor, and my phone rings, and it's Governor Brown at like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And he just said, hey Cameron, I know, you've been talking to Nancy. We really need this bill to get through. I'd really love to have your vote. And I felt like that was a perfect culmination of my career in the legislature, that on my very last vote as a Republican member, I had the governor call me to ask for my vote. And I said, "You know what, Governor, I appreciate. Thank you for reaching out. I'll be there for you." And
so I just got a comment here from a viewer. He said, "What did you choose to socialize?" No, I'm just kidding.
Capitalism. He made it stronger. And
so
more
what was it here,
conservative.
Cameron? Fess up.
Yeah. So no, it's fine. And it ended up being my seatmate, a guy named Nathan Fletcher from San Diego, who's now, he's now a Democrat, but he's a county supervisor now, and he and I went, and we were the final vote, and the final 2 votes, and we put it out. And I know some of my Republican friends were angry because it was this timber tax, and
you're the reason I have to pay for all the extra wood.
Right.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, justify this one, pal.
I'm
ready for this
what
one.
Wood? Do you mean charcoal?
Yeah, I'm the reason that there still is wood products in California because, part of you don't realize just how big California is. And I thought that I was as prepared as anybody to go to the legislature. I'd been a staffer, been on local government, worked in the private sector, but you don't realize the diversity of California from the coastline. And I didn't know anything about the timber industry, but I did a tour, and you get up there and you see people going out of work. And, I will tell you, I had Republican representatives from that district asking me to cast that vote because there was a tax on it, but they didn't want to do it themselves.
They didn't want to do it, so they're asking you.
Because they knew it was good for their district. Yeah.
Well, I do give you credit.
So-
One of the reasons I forgot to mention this when I was giving you accolades at the beginning of the program, but I liked your phrase. You said Cameron is always in play. I think what you
Smythe
said.
is in play.
Or Smythe is in play. You're always like, Smythe is always in play.
I mean, hey, that was our staff motto, because what's the point? Again, you're a Republican up there, how do you make yourself valuable?
Yeah.
And I worry about, I would not want to be in the legislature now when you're 60-20, I think we are at a more advantage having Christy Smith as our representative now than Dante. 51-29, 60-20, there is no, and I've been there is no purpose when you have 20 members. There is nothing that can't be done without you. They need Democrats, any majority, needs 54 votes in the Assembly and 27 in the Senate. They could call session and not invite one Republican and 6 Democrats and still do everything. Still raise taxes, still pass
Okay,
any
so this
bill.
is where my concerns start kicking in. I got some questions for you.
Yeah.
This is what I asked Andrew Tabon and Mark Winger. I said, aren't you afraid of single party rule? Like, can't you look at what happened to Bulgaria? Can't you look at what happens to many parts of Michigan that haven't had a representative literally since 1962 that was Republican? See the urban blight. Like, there's never actually been a city larger than 1 million people that's gone this way, that in less than 40 years hasn't had a murder rate that rivals Mexico right now and hasn't been completely bankrupt, because literally anything single-party rule touches in this country results in economic disaster. And it just happens to be that you never get single-party rule from Republicans, ever, anywhere. You just don't get it for sustained long enough periods of times. But you do from these blue areas, and we just turn blue. So you were talking about geeking out with the numbers.
Yes.
Well, be careful one thing. You're not raising this thing just as a Republican. For anyone in the political spectrum, we should be concerned about the fact that
this is a total independent analysis.
Single-party rule is dangerous for any country, any entity.
And here's what's going to happen.
I like how all of us put our hands on the desk the exact same way.
At this point, there are very few Republican seats for to go after now. Once you get down to 20, those are pretty deep red entrenched seats. So it now becomes the mod Dems. The mod Dems become the target because there are at least a third of the California, and this is not any hyperbole. There are at least a third of the California legislature believes that making a profit is immoral. Not they disagree. They believe in their soul that it is immoral to make any profit.
Yeah, we're not talking socialism.
No, we're talking Leninism here.
We're talking Leninism. We're talking communism. We're talking
And-
extreme liberal. I don't even like to call it the Democratic Party because it truly is not what I see as Democrats stand for.
The first vote, the first litmus test in California will be the single payer bill. They're going to put up single payer, and any Democrat that doesn't vote for it sets themselves up to be primaried from the left. And so you look at Christie, you look at some of these other Dems that that are already mod Dems from the Central Valley, and they're making their own political calculations that what is their value now, and so because if they don't go hard left,
it's exponential. Growth is always exponential, but decline is always exponential.
Absolutely.
And so, so you were talking the numbers here, and this is where some of my fears start kicking in, and also some of my frustrations that I just don't think I analyzed the numbers the way you did or other people did, but I totally obviously value and respect your experience a lot over mine. So I want to shoot this past you. You keep mentioning demographics and how, for example, 40,000 people less voted for Steve Knight than had in previous elections. And if the sentence I'm saying is correct or incorrect, please correct me, but had the same amount of people that voted for him before voted for him this time, he would have won, correct?
Correct.
Handily.
Yeah.
Now, the same, guess what, could have been said about Mitt Romney. Had the same amount of people that voted for John McCain the previous presidential election before voted for Mitt Romney, he would have been our president and ousted Barack Obama's second term, okay? And So I'm noticing this trend that in the Republican Party, it just seems to be, I'm not seeing the voter registration. We just got 1 million more Democrats. And when you're talking about only 9.5 million people showing up to vote altogether, injecting another 900,000 into that mix is a 10% advantage statewide. And when you looked at all of these statewide elections, whether it was John Cox, whether it was Gavin Newsom, whether it was Lieutenant Governor, Insurance Commissioner, the whole 9 yards, okay, these were getting won by, no joke, all of them were within a percentage of each other. 70% went for the Democrat, 29% went for the Republican, 31%. They were all within a percentage or two. So I look at this, no matter how you redistrict all the people that live in North LA County and Santa Clarita, you can't district away all of the Republicans enough that they can't have a force that can win assembly seats unless they're doing such a lackadaisical job of everything from voter registration to door knocking to party enthusiasm. That's where the problem is. Am I incorrect?
So where was
here?
the Republican Party this time?
That's what I'm asking. Where were they on this? Because I feel like Steve Knight was hung out to dry by the 38th district. He had to do everything on his own, all his own fundraising, all of his own door knocking, all his own everything. He didn't have the party coming up from him, not the national party, not the state party.
Well,
you look at the local Democrats here. Every week on their blog, there's 3 stories about why Republicans suck. And they've got 5,000 comments,
right,
and they're door knocking like crazy. I'm getting phone calls like crazy. I give Steve Knight credit for his town hall. His outreach was great, especially because he wasn't blessed with the Cameron Smythe personality. He's not able to walk in a room and kiss 10 babies.
Well,
and,
but he had the
mailers.
mailers.
Shake hands.
He had the mailers.
Yeah.
He had the ads. He was trying to do that. But again, I think it's that whole synergy. Where was the party?
Well, and I think there's a couple arguments. I think one, things start to get split now that all the races are consolidated. Mm-hmm. So you have competing resources. You have city council races. You have school board. On top of that, in 2020 there'll be water board races. So you have local districts as well. Steve received significant money from not the RNC but the Republican RNCC or whatever it is, the RCCC. That he received several $1 million from there. But again, nobody had
a Bloomberg stepping in for $5 million the last
week. Right. I mean, and you can't. You can't discount that. And when you look at,
but how is that not seen coming? Because I hate to say,
I think they saw it coming. You saw it coming with the Act Blue. I mean, again, Act Blue was something that took money from all over the country.
No, but I'm saying, how did this is just the only thing I don't see is if I'm, well, it was Ryan's Priebus, but if I'm any kind of Republican authority,
Romney McDaniel.
Okay, well,
she's the RNC chair.
But I'm saying
no one knows that.
There's actually a perfect example right there. Nobody knows that.
I'm sitting there going, where it was like the Republican Party decided we got this guy in charge who doesn't really want to be a Republican. We don't know what he is. But as for the rest of us, we're just going to kind of decide, are we against him? Are we for him? Are we running for cover? What are we doing? And I'm going, you missed it. You had a chance to grab the middle and hang on and become a party. Because the Democrats aren't real happy with the liberal move. Many of us aren't.
Yes, and there's tons of reasonable people. I also see, okay, so suburban women voted 19% more Democrat this time than last time, which is totally predictable because a lot of women that are juggling a ton of plates here, they're getting their kids to school on time while having a part-time job, while, dealing with their husband, the mortgage, the this, the that. They don't get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers and what the platforms are and how X, Y, or Z thing has changed, but they see Donald Trump on the TV at least once a week when they tune in, whether it's misrepresented or not by a left-leaning media, they see this mean guy doing mean things, and so they're going to trend Democrat. So I get that.
I'm letting that one go by.
Well, and I mean, you look at if you take Trump out of it, and you look at the economic numbers, you look at tax revenue. Right now, they just reported that with reducing taxes by $3 billion, there is still much more tax revenue being generated into the federal budget. You look at all those indicators. If it was any, Republicans should have gained seats throughout Congress, but because of how polarizing the president is, You know, like if Romney or McCain or Obama had all these economic successes that are happening now, there wouldn't even be a question.
Okay, well, even removing Trump from the argument because, you can't remove him from the argument. No, I get you can't.
This was not an economic policy vote. People
no,
didn't
it was
vote
a
with their
hatred vote.
It was, but why was there so much hate? That's the part that I get concerned about because we seem to be trying to splinter every issue.
Social media echo chambers, the rules being completely broken. Social rules have been completely broken in my lifetime.
Immigration, we sit there and say, you're good, you're bad, how you treat your spouse doesn't matter anymore. We can point to that. Then we turn around and say, okay, let's talk pro-life, pro-birth, all these issues, and become so much animosity. We can't seem to find
the huge shift has been
solve.
This is the huge shift I've noticed. Tip O'Neill was very famous for saying all politics are local. If you had a strong Democrat, then you might vote Democrat on the presidential ticket because I don't know about Richard Nixon, but I do know about Cameron Smythe. You know what I'm saying? So there was this all politics are local. This was the first time where I really feel all politics are national. Okay, it's completely flipped with Facebook, with Snapchat, with all of our social media, everything. What the president does, it's not just coattails now. It is ironclad
chains. They are
ironclad chains.
Drag you down, or they're
drag you down or up.
So, he's the only guy I know that could have put out an entire report on the change in the weather, choosing the day after Thanksgiving when everybody was available, basically to look at it and start talking about it. And the next thing you know is this report, which probably could have just kind of passed out, gets a lot of coverage. Totally opposite what he expected.
Yeah.
This is normal.
When we got Jess Phoenix on, hopefully I'm inviting her to come on a couple of weeks from now because I do want to have
explain
the whole
report.
Climate change argument. But this is the only thing I don't get is, to me, it seems that this is less of a demographic shift problem because no matter the demographic, capitalism works for everybody. And we only need to get 3% more of the African-American vote nationwide to solidify serious gains anywhere, right? And I am unconvinced, completely unconvinced, that we can't get or convince in a room full of 100 African-Americans, 3 more per election, that it might be a good idea to have a slightly more free market approach to this thing than the Ocasio-Cortez socialize everything approach.
Talking about a free market in the African American community, they might necessarily not like some of those terms.
But either way, you look at it, and I noticed this when Barack Obama, because right now we're comparing, for example, the Steve Knight effect, where if he just would have had the same amount of people vote for him as voted in the previous presidential election, he would have won.
That is a vote. If you choose not to vote, you've just expressed your opinion.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And they did.
So here's my concern, is that Mitt Romney had the opportunity, the most popular radio show, I mean, here we are on radio, one of the most influential pieces of media in the African-American community is a very successful radio host on the East Coast that has massive penetration into the African-American media community. Okay, he's been super successful for millions of years. I'm completely blanking on his name right now, but we'll continue on.
Les Brown?
I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but I do know that in the 40 days leading up to the election, Barack Obama was on his show 3 times. 3 times. And Mitt Romney never showed up. And I look at that and I just think, what person out there that's trying to just get as many votes as the guy before him with people that already voted Republican and only needs to peel off 1% of the African-American vote? You're not going to go on the most influential radio program in the nation because it's like they've just given up. So I noticed that as a microcosm for what seems to be going on in the Republican Party as a whole. That it's like, oh, demographics are shifting. Millennials, we never did get them. You know, those kids with the iPhones doing their thing. Oh, but I just did hire a new media person, and they've got an email list. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's horrible. And
do you think the Republican Party might recognize that they may need to also come back to the middle and grab hold of all those Democrats who would love to join into their old party?
Well, this is where I want Cameron's wisdom involved. Do you think it's really an ideological thing or just a nuts and bolts of being able to function as a party thing? Because I've noticed that Never before in American history has there been a bigger divide between generations, or a bigger generation gap, than Generation Xers and Millennials, and it's due to technology. The internet did more to our society to disrupt things and change a 20-year-old from a 40-year-old than any other piece of technology. What an 8-track did to the vinyl record player didn't put a generation gap between the kids born in the 70s and the kids born in the 80s like the iPhone did to their dads, like my dad and me, okay? So since the Gutenberg press, I don't think we can say there's been a technological advancement that has interrupted things. And I've just noticed when it comes to nuts and bolts party just functioning as a political party, the Dems adapted. The Dems adapted to technology, to the memes, to the snarkiness, to the, the soundbite culture that we live in, but the Republicans haven't. So I don't think it's actually an ideological thing. I don't think the Republican Party's problem is ideological. I think it is functional. Am I wrong in this?
I think there's answers to both. I think there is a combination. You have to have a nuts and bolts election infrastructure, and campaign infrastructure. That has to be a part of it. Your ground game, has to be important. But you have to be willing, to match and adapt to the times. And I'll give you, again, last thing, a perfect example is when I ran for the city council again 2 years ago. I never used social media in my legislative campaigns. My first assembly campaign was 2006. I think I had about 17 Facebook friends, and they were my buddies from high school. It was a new, Twitter, Instagram, none of those
And
existed.
I think they stole your picture and put it on your Wikipedia page because it is straight up 06.
Nice. I was a handsome kid back then. So the first thing I did was reach out to a social media expert, knowing that I was running in a local race with a lot of noise. There was going to be the presidential, the Senate, the Assembly, the supervisors race, a lot of competing campaigns. And so how was I going to function to get myself, out and get through that noise? And so I adapted, that I couldn't run the same campaign that I ran, in 2006, because then I was an incumbent. And so I was able to just kind of, move through my last couple elections. But it was completely different, and how was I going to be effective? And I think my social media campaign was extremely effective. And you look at, the numbers and the cost that goes along with it, and the number of views of the videos that we put together. And I think that played a big role in my success.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break right now, but I want to get into talking about what you thought was successful and also the future of our party and how they're going to pull it together here. Because if not, I think we're just going to start seeing more primaries from the left. So we're just going to take a quick commercial break really fast. This is Problem Solver Politics. It is 7:50.
How did you become addicted? A friend? Were you at a party and someone said, "Hey, try this"? Then you got the cold sweats and started shaking. And the more you did it, the more it didn't work. So you switched to the needle. Now you're a train wreck. Drinking, drugging, broke. Your family hates you, and you hate you. Get out of your hell on earth now. Call the Detox and Treatment Helpline today for immediate help. In many cases, your insurance may cover the costs. We can't guarantee it, but we can guarantee we have what you need to change your life for the better. Pick up your cell phone and call right now. 800-694-1135. 800-694-1135. 800-694-1135. That number again, 800-694-1135.
Now FM, 98.1 FM, and AM 1220. Your hometown station.
All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. We are live in the KHTS studio with Cardon Ellis. I'm your host, and my co-host,
Mark Murphy. You got to have another party to balance out the other.
We also have the Honorable Cameron Smythe with us, who served 3 terms as the state assemblyman before he was termed out, as we always like to make sure we delineate the difference.
Someone who walked more of a moderate center, progressive, extreme left, and extreme right assemblyman, right?
Yeah.
All the above.
All of the above.
All the above.
Okay, so we were just talking previously in the other segment about how statewide we got smacked. And by we, I mean, I guess, the red team this go around. oftentimes people think that I'm very conservative, but I always say no. For very liberal reasons, I actually consistently vote Republican in this state. I think it might be different if I were like in Wyoming or something. You know what I'm saying?
Conservative. But anyway.
So yeah, now let's talk local here, because we're in the presence of somebody who has the rare experience of having served both locally and statewide, and a lot of these fears that I had talked about that led to the blue tsunami in California, I fear are happening here. For 3 or 4 elections with Buck McKeon's team, I said, dude, you just got encroached on another 1.5% voter reg. Wait, this year you just got another 0.75%. Like, what are you doing to stop the erosion? Because erosion kills just as bad as an earthquake does, all right? So I have this fear where single-party rule is so destructive. I've literally thought we should pass a local city council ordinance where if we ever have single-party rule in the city council, there should be like an honorary non-voting but at least able to opine seat. You know what I'm saying?
We actually almost have single-party rule at the city council level, but I don't like to even talk about it because I don't think it should be a Republican-Democrat.
No, I get what you're saying.
But you need to remind everybody, in the current situation, you said it best, Cameron, we're now looking at the 60-20. Not a Republican needs to show up, and the Democrats can put through anything they want to, including tax increases or new programs.
With lifeboating 6 Democrats.
Wow.
As well. I mean, they don't even need all the Democrats, and that's what's going to happen.
There is no check and balance in the system.
So how do we stop that from happening here? Because, I mean, let's face it. Some people think it's ideological. I don't think it's ideological. I just think it's practical, the non-function of the statewide Republican Party in many regards. But, like, okay, let's just say, unfortunately, they're traveling to Sacramento, and Laureen West and Marsha McLean, unfortunately, obviously we don't hope this happens, but let's say they got in a car accident, all of a sudden, boom. They won because of their incumbency. But all of the progressive local Democrats were hitting 15 percentage points in their elections. We're hitting 5 percentage points in their elections. I don't see health because we're not breeding other Republicans that could fill their seat if there were that car accident.
So, a couple things. I mean, one, you need to remember that all local offices in California are nonpartisan.
Oh yeah, but we all know.
But you don't all know. I don't think that's true. When you look at the ballot, and they're especially now that the city council is tied to the presidential. In 2016, you had roughly 70% of the people voting for the city council were doing so for the very first time, because you had such a huge jump in voter turnout. Before, when it was an April election, and you could, and my first winning election in 2000, I called every single voter for that was going to vote in that election. You can identify the high propensity of those who vote in city council. The Sunday night before the election, we finished. We called everybody, and you're like, okay, what do I do now? I mean, it's you get through it. Whereas now you obviously can't. You can't get that. I mean, Bob Keller and I each received over 30,000 votes, ourselves in 2016, and the average voter turnout prior to that was 15,000 total.
Wow. So
it's so there is that people there isn't as clear Republican Democrat, but so I think in order to be successful, Santa Clarita is a different place, and you demonstrate it. I mean, you look at the city. We do polling every couple of years.
Okay, hold on a second, Cameron. I mean, you can say it's not clear, but when they rebuilt the Staples Center, Kobe Bryant came out and he was on the news, and they said, well, is this the Clippers Stadium or is this the Lakers Stadium? And he said, well, I noticed they didn't paint the seats blue and they painted them purple, right? I mean, you could say that, it's nonpartisan, but look at the voter parties. They didn't show up at the Democrat vote party that night when everybody was counting votes and looking at the screens.
But you can argue that there were people that voted for Katie Hill and then did vote for the incumbent city council members.
I think we saw a lot of that. Talking to my kids, it came across very strongly, and a lot of my friends said the same thing. They might vote when the seat that was going to be in the national scene, but when it came to local, they voted for the people who took care of them.
And now that may have been different if it's partisan, right? That could have changed if people had R's and D's by their name.
Because these new people that got the voter registration, these new million voters that were registered by Democrats, if you have gone to the polls because somebody voter regged you, you're voting straight ticket.
Right, and that's, again, anecdotally, I was with some Texas legislators, and one of them talked about in this election when they're doing straight party line vote that, in Harris County, the second largest county in the country, they had all these judicial races where they still put Republican and Democrat, and they voted, for a couple judges of people who, again, I don't even know if they are attorneys or have passed the bar yet, and they are going in as judges because people just voted straight
party.
Because you can do party line vote in some states where you can just say I'm voting Democrat ticket, so you can't switch, so you're getting people that aren't qualified. But I think in the city,
but in the Texas, they just had to make sure they carry a gun, then they're fine.
And that
you need that in the courthouse.
That's
important.
You can buy a gun case in the State House of Texas. It's amazing. I travel to a lot of different state capitals, and what you can do, Utah. Okay, I got to tell you a real quick story. I know we're out of time, but this is so. On the floor of the state legislature, state assembly in Utah, they were debating banning the death penalty. In the gallery was the brother of the very last person that was put to death by the state. So during the debate, the guy in the gallery decides to throw a whole bunch of pictures of his brother onto the floor of the assembly during the debate from the gallery, just throws them in. With that, at least half a dozen legislators pulled out their guns and pointed them straight up at the guy in the gallery.
Oh, geez. Oh, West. Oh, man. Woo. The last state to pull off a public execution, and then you've got 15 legislators concealing and carrying
with their gun legally on the floor of the state house.
Oh, Cameron, I wish we could just sit for another hour talking with you, but unfortunately, we are coming up on a hard out here in a second.
I follow the George Costanza rule that I just leave on a high note.
That's it. I know. So that's more than a high. That's like a high noon note right there. All right. So we're gonna have to invite you back and talk a little bit more about the future of the party and the future of politics here in Santa Clarita. It's been a pleasure having you. Once again, this is Problem Solver Politics. Come see us next week. It is 7:59.